What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We continue to go through each conference and look at the teams that were maybe overrated or maybe underrated from the 2020 college football season. And what we're doing here is we're looking at one-possession games. So what would have happened if your team had won all of their one-possession games, or lost all of their one-possession games, or split those one-possession games? Because that is usually a big indicator of a team that maybe is overrated, or at least not as good as their record would suggest, or underrated, better than their record would suggest. Because if you're in a one-possession game, that is a game that you've got an opportunity to win. And we've already done this with the SEC and the ACC. And when I did those videos, I talked about doing this from 2019. And every single team that I did this with, if they were overrated compared to their record, they would wind up having a bad year the next year or going down. If they were underrated, they have a good year. And that has played out every single time. I've got one team in the Big Ten that has kind of broken that trend, and that's Indiana. Indiana would have actually been in the overrated category for 2019, but they did not drop off in 2020. So they have been able to be successful in one-possession games 2 years in a row. First team I think that I've seen that's been able to do that. Again, we talked about these teams that they struggle in one-possession games one year. The next year they always do really well. It just kind of plays out that way, and that's what has happened now that we've done this a couple of years. So Indiana has kind of broken that trend, but the other teams in the Big Ten, they follow right along. Okay, teams that were overrated from 2019, Penn State and Minnesota. Both teams were really good in one-possession games in 2019. Now you flip that around. Both teams had drop-offs in 2020. And like I said, this is I think something that I didn't read as much into it as I probably should have. This could be a really good indicator of teams that are maybe going to go up or down for 2021. And then how about the teams that were underrated in 2019 that were not good in one-possession games? Maryland and Northwestern. Northwestern, they won the Big Ten West. Obviously, they were much better. And then Maryland, I think, surprised some people. They were better than most people expected. So, again, this play has played out for pretty much every team that we have done except for Indiana. Indiana has been the one team that has done really well in those one-possession games 2 years in a row and wound up really being better than I think people would have expected. And when we talk, we talk about the teams that really maybe were overrated or underrated. We're talking about a 2-game difference. So a team that won or lost 2 or more games of those one-possession games. So like a team that went 3-1, not a team that went 2-1, because that one's so close. Hopefully that makes sense. But let's get into it anyways. We're going to start with the Big Ten East. We'll start with the East, and here are the records from 2020. Now, it's not going to be as great here in the Big Ten just because you just didn't have as many games and teams didn't play the same amount of games. So it is what it is. But Ohio State's 5-0. Indiana was 6-1. Penn State 4-5. As bad as the year was for Penn State, they still won their final 4 games, and they still finished number 3 in this division. Maryland was 2-3. Not a great record, but again, compared to I think what people expected from them, it was actually a pretty good year. Rutgers definitely surprised people. They were 3-6. Michigan was 2-4, and Michigan State at the bottom at 2-5. Michigan State, I don't think, was the worst team in this division. I guess because they played 7 games, they wound up getting more losses. I don't know, but that's how the standings looked in 2020. How were these teams in one-possession games? Ohio State was 1-0. The Indiana game was a one-possession game, although they really controlled that for most of the game, but still it does technically fit here. And I guess they could have lost that game. Indiana was once again really solid in these one-possession games. They were 2-1. Not a huge difference there in wins and losses, but still a positive record. And they've been able to do that 2 years in a row now. Penn State 0-2. Talked about it. They were really good in one-possession games in 2019. Now they go 0-2 this year. Maybe next year Penn State turns that back around, and maybe Penn State is a team that's on the rise in the Big Ten East. Maryland 1-1. Rutgers 2-3. They had a lot of one-possession games. Michigan was 1-1, and Michigan State 1-0. So how about the best case scenario? What could have been for these teams if they had won their one-possession games? Ohio State still would have been 5-0. Indiana could have been 7-0. Penn State could have been 6-3. So again, as bad as the year was for them, if they win those close games, if they call Penix out of bounds in that overtime play where he dives for the end zone, and that was a controversial call, and they win their other one possession game, it could have been a 6-3 year for Penn State. Could have been a much different season for them, but they lost those 2 games. So they were 6-3. Maryland 3-2. They could have had a winning record, but only 5 games. Rutgers could have been 6-3 as well, just like Penn State. This is a team that really surprised this year. Surprised me, I know that. And they have really turned things around quickly there. We'll see how they look next year. Michigan 3-3. That was the best case scenario for Michigan, was finishing 500 this year. That is just crazy. And the Michigan State could have been 2-5. Wouldn't have changed anything because they did win their one possession game. How about if these teams lost their one possession games? Ohio State could have been 4-1. Indiana could have been 4-3. Maybe Indiana was overrated a little bit, and that is what you maybe saw in the game against Ole Miss. I don't know. Penn State could have been 4-5. They were at the bottom. They couldn't have been any worse because they lost all their one possession games. Maryland could have been 1-4. Rutgers, we talked about, could have been 6-3. They also could have been 1-8. They just had a lot of one possession games. Michigan could have been 1-5. Could have been even worse for the Wolverines. And then Michigan State could have been 1-6. So if you split the one possession games, if every team splits their one possession games, this is how the records would have looked. Ohio State still would have won this division. Indiana still would have been number 2. Penn State again would have been 5-4. Maryland 2-3. And there's Rutgers at 3.5 and 5.5. Michigan 2-4. Michigan State 1.5 and 5.5. So really nothing's going to change much here in the standings. No one actually, besides Penn State, was 2 or more games. There's 2 or more games difference in their wins and losses. Again, Penn State would be that only team, but they were so far behind Indiana. Indiana wouldn't have changed anything. So the standings wouldn't have really changed in the Big Ten East, but I think what really jumps out to me is Penn State. Penn State could have had a much better year if they won those one possession games. Penn State might be the team that was underrated in the Big Ten East and might be a team to watch out for in 2021. Let's go to the Big Ten West now. This is how the standings looked. Northwestern finished 6-1. Like I said, they were, I think, 0-2 in one possession games in 2019. So if you go off of that, you would expect them to be better, and they were. Iowa 6-2, Wisconsin 3-3. And this doesn't tell the whole story. Wisconsin was a different team at the beginning of the year compared to the end of the year with the injuries at wide receiver, and a lot of teams had opt-outs and injuries and things like that. So I don't know if this is going to play out the same way as it did from 2019. We'll have to wait and see. Minnesota 3-4. I talked about how they were just really good in the one possession games back in 2019. Maybe they were overrated. It kind of played out that way this year. Nebraska 3-5. Purdue 2-4. And Illinois 2-6 in 2020. How were these teams in one possession games? Northwestern 2-0. So they flipped the script. They were 0-2 in one possession games in 19, 2-0 in 2020. And I am telling you, you just go down the list of these teams. If they were bad in 2019 in one possession games, they were good in one possession games in 2020, and go vice versa. Just go look at the numbers here. It's crazy. Louisville, another team that I think when we did the ACC, they were 3-0 in 2019, 0-3 in 2020. Indiana, like I said, the one team that has kind of broken that trend. Nebraska and Purdue, I think, were both not great in one possession games, and they finished with a losing record, but not a huge number there. Just a one game, separating the wins and losses. But Iowa 1-2, Wisconsin 1-1, Minnesota 2-2, Nebraska 2-3, Purdue 2-3, and Illinois 1-1. So most teams here pretty much splitting the one possession games. Northwestern will be the one team that had a 2-game difference as they finished 2-0 in those one possession games, and that's really what it came down to in this division. How about if these teams won all of their one possession games? Best case scenario, what could have been for these teams? Nothing would have changed for Northwestern. They would have been 6-1. But how about Iowa? Iowa could have been 8-0 if they win their one possession games. Both of their losses came in one possession games. You win those games, this team's 8-0. They're in the Big Ten Championship with a shot at the college football playoff. That's how different the season could have been for Iowa. I really would have liked to have seen them in a bowl game. We didn't get to see them play their bowl game. Would have liked to have seen them play one more game just to kind of get a little bit better of a feel of what this Iowa team maybe is going to look like next year. They could be dangerous. Wisconsin could have been 4-2. Minnesota could have been 5-2. Could have had a pretty good year. Nebraska 6-2. They could have had a very solid year if they won those one possession games. Purdue could have been 5-1. All but one of their losses came in a one possession game. And then Illinois could have been 3-5. Could have been a better year for them as well. How about though if these teams lost their one possession games, Northwestern could have dropped all the way to 4-3. Again, those one possession games make such a difference. Iowa could have been 5-3. Wisconsin could have been 2-4. Minnesota could have been 1-6. Nebraska 1-7. Again, a lot of one possession games in the Big Ten, even though they didn't play as many games. Purdue could have been 0-6. And then you got Illinois. They could have been 1-7. So if you split these games, what would the standings have looked like? What would the records have looked like? Northwestern would have been 5-2, but Iowa actually would have won this division if they would have split their, which obviously you can't split 3 games, but if I'm just doing the math here, if they split those one possession games, you just flip the game with Northwestern, Iowa would have won this division. They would have had the best record. Wisconsin would have been 3-3, Minnesota 3-4, Nebraska 3.5, 4.5, Purdue 2.5, 3.5, Illinois 2-6. So that's the one thing that jumps out to me is maybe Iowa was underrated a little bit. Maybe they were actually the best team in this division. Obviously didn't play out that way. They didn't win the division. Early on, they lost a couple of games, but they finished really strong. Maybe Northwestern was overrated a little bit. They didn't look overrated against Auburn in the bowl game, so maybe this doesn't tell the whole story here. Plus, you have to look at the schedules being so different and teams playing different teams. It's not a great indicator, but again, based off of 2019 when we did this, it was just something to look at and something that wound up being pretty accurate in predicting which teams would be better or worse in 2020. We'll see if it plays out that way in 2021. Give me your thoughts on the Big Ten and the teams that you think were maybe overrated or underrated down in the comments below. Again, based off of these numbers, Northwestern probably the most overrated team, Penn State maybe the most underrated team, but a lot of close games, a lot of one possession games in the Big Ten, and that'll probably be the case again next year. We'll have to wait and see. Again, your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.